Hello and welcome. In this video, you are asked to think consciously about your relationship to your views and opinions and how they relate to your sense of self. It might seem self-evident that we are not our views, opinions, or attitudes. So, why are they so important to defend for most people? Why is it so important for us to be right? In light of this, why do most people often choose to be right? As with so many things that wreak havoc in our lives, much of the answer lies just below the surface of our conscious awareness. Eckhart Tolle provides deep insights into how we take mental positions when we argue and why this happens. Understanding these concepts helps illuminate the subtle and often unconscious mechanisms of the mind that lead to conflict and defensiveness. Often without realizing it, we become attached to what is nothing more than thought constructs inside our heads, make them part of our identity, and feel attacked when someone disagrees with them. This may be true in public discussions of collective matters, as well as discussions with intimate partners about issues relating to the relationship. Often, it can even be due to a simple miscommunication. This attachment to being right leads us down a path of suffering. Here, a little bit of bluntness might be called for. It's time to end division. And if we want to end division, we need a conscious, responsible approach where we discern which convictions truly matter to us, stay firm in those, but let go of the need to have others agree with us, and let go of the ego's nonsensical programming that inflates the importance of anything we've built an identity around. The psychologist and creator of the nonviolent communication model, Marshall Rosenberg, said, "Do you want to be right or happy? You can't be both." To break free from the ego's shenanigans, it's crucial to become aware of the dynamics of mental positions, because while we don't have power over others, we can always, to the best of our ability, take responsibility for how we behave. Now, in the heat of an argument, notice how you are no longer present in the moment. Instead, your mind is caught in a web of thoughts, spinning narratives that fuel your position. If you're observant of what is going on, you can often notice that you get entangled in a web of words, where you, in the end, have no idea of what the argument is about. If you're really observant, you can also notice that there is a certain energy behind what is being played out, which is usually not pleasant, unless you have the particular personality dysfunction that makes you thrive on hostile arguing. As said in the beginning, we derive a false sense of identity from our mental positions. We become so entangled that we no longer discern where our thoughts end and our true essence begins. This leads us to the concept of the ego. It is a somewhat elusive concept, and the attempt here is not to give an exhaustive definition, but to help you identify a part of your experience better so that you can gain your own experiential knowledge about it. The ego can be thought of as a mental construct, a collection of thoughts, identifications, and self-concepts that we use to define who we think we are. It feeds on separation and thrives on contrast, reinforcing itself through narratives that position us as distinct from others. This division creates the illusion of a separate self, which feels constantly under threat. When we argue, it is often this egoic part of us that takes charge, seeking to defend its identity and beliefs. When we release the need to cling to a viewpoint, we liberate ourselves from some of the incessant chatter of the ego. When we engage in arguments, we usually believe that we are defending our viewpoints based on logic or conviction. However, according to Tolle, the true underlying motivation often stems from the ego's need for validation and superiority. The mind, driven by the ego, unconsciously seeks to affirm itself by proving that it's right and, by extension, that the other party is wrong. This desire for validation is so ingrained that it can override a genuine interest in finding common ground or understanding different perspectives. Thus, this also limits our worldview severely. One significant point Tolle emphasizes is that the ego's nature is inherently defensive. It equates being wrong with being diminished or invalidated. This is why, during disagreements, we often feel an intense need to justify our positions and maintain a sense of control. The ego fears vulnerability and sees admission of error as a form of loss. This fear drives reactive behaviors, ranging from subtle dismissals to overtly aggressive stances. The resulting dynamic is more about protecting a mental position than resolving an issue. Recognizing this can shift our perspective and help us see that many conflicts are unnecessary and fueled by an unconscious need to maintain the ego's role as protagonist, which subsequently turns others into antagonists. In situations where the ego is clinging to its position in this manner, it might be wise to remember the statement, "Do you want to be right or happy?" Tolle discusses the compulsion to be right as a form of unconscious identification with thoughts and beliefs. When people are fully identified with their mental positions, they lose sight of the possibility that their beliefs are just that, beliefs, not absolute truths. This identification makes arguments emotionally charged because any perceived challenge to one's beliefs becomes a perceived threat to one's sense of self. In these moments, the energy of the ego dominates, causing a temporary blindness to the deeper truth of interconnectedness and shared humanity. In releasing our attachment to being right, we embrace humility. This humility brings us closer to others, which is, whether you can see this right now, one of the main objectives of the journey that we are on. As you wake up more to your true nature, you will realize your fundamental oneness with everyone and everything else, and the more we can embody this oneness in our interactions, the more we grow and evolve. With this expanded perspective, it also follows that what is natural for us is love, cooperation, and harmony, and that the ego is conning us into conflicts that are not for anyone's highest good. This is experiential knowledge as opposed to intellectual so-called knowledge, and it is where everyone's journey is eventually leading, even though we are allowed to struggle against it as much as we want before we surrender. No one is going to force anyone into anything. Tolle describes how our minds incessantly replay past arguments or anticipate future ones, which is something that can be observed if you pay attention to your thoughts related to an emotionally charged discussion. This perpetual cycle obstructs the stillness within us, preventing us from experiencing the depth of the present moment. By releasing our grip on mental positions, we dismantle the shackles of this cycle. Can you see how insane the workings of the ego are here? First, we have actual arguments, based around illusory positions that we attach importance to. Then we replay these arguments in distorted form or anticipate future ones, often in imagined scenarios where we are right and the others are wrong. Tolle also notes that the structures of the ego are inherently unstable. The ego's identity is composed of thoughts, opinions, and beliefs, which are by nature transient and ever-changing. When we base our sense of self on these mental structures, we end up in a continuous state of seeking confirmation and resisting change. This leads to reactivity, where we react to others' words or actions, not based on what they truly mean, but based on how our ego interprets them. This is another important point. Not only does the ego engage in unnecessary conflicts to defend its positions, it also distorts information and the words and behaviors of others so that it all fits with the ego's preconceived notions. Identification with the ego creates a distorted perception and makes you believe that this perception equals fact. The path away from taking rigid mental positions in arguments lies in cultivating awareness. Tolle introduces the idea of watching the thinker. We've already touched upon this, and it involves observing our thoughts without identifying with them. This practice helps us recognize when the ego is trying to dominate a conversation and shift our awareness to the present moment. By doing so, we create a space where we can respond thoughtfully rather than react defensively. This space is where true listening and genuine dialogue can occur. Tolle suggests that when we bring presence into conversations, we break free from the cycle of egoic defensiveness. Presence allows us to observe the mind's mechanisms as they unfold, recognizing that behind every thought pattern is the still and unchanging consciousness. This deeper awareness reveals that most arguments are, at their core, powered by the ego's resistance to what is. By becoming conscious of this resistance, we weaken its hold and open up to the possibility of understanding and peace. Furthermore, Tolle notes that one effective way to approach arguments differently is to practice listening without formulating a response while the other person is speaking. This requires relinquishing the urge to plan rebuttals or interrupt, both of which stem from the ego's need to assert itself. True listening means fully receiving what the other person is saying without judgment. This shift in focus allows the interaction to move from confrontation to communication. In conclusion, Tolle's teachings illuminate how mental positions in arguments stem from an identification with the ego's narrative. This attachment leads to defensive and reactive behavior, as the ego seeks to protect its fragile sense of self. By bringing awareness and presence into our interactions, we can step back from these mental positions and engage more openly and peacefully. The key lies in realizing that our true identity is beyond thoughts and beliefs. It is the observing consciousness that allows us to navigate conversations with understanding and compassion. This shift from identification with the mind to presence enables us to transform arguments from conflicts into opportunities for connection and insight. This perspective is another part of the shift that many of us go through. It requires that we realize that we've been interacting with the human experience from a very limited perspective, unaware that we have many more options around how to respond to the situations we find ourselves in than those we've learned and that readily present themselves to us at first glance. It also means that the more we cultivate present moment awareness and therefore expand our awareness and align ourselves with the flow of life, the more we will become aware of options that have priorly been hidden in plain sight. Much of our lives, until we started waking up from it and seeing it for what it is, has been on autopilot, including how we have treated our relationships and the often conflict-filled conversations that are parts of them. A crucial aspect of this relational aspect of awakening is to practice staying open and present and just listen instead of formulating responses and counter-arguments, whether we're in a conflict or not. What we are doing, in essence, is letting go of all of the dysfunctional ways that we have been doing things, at least since the beginning of recorded history, so that our dealings with the world and each other can be restored to their proper order. Our fixation on being right distances us from the richness of the present moment and inhibits us from living life fully. Ultimately, it causes division and distances us from each other. By relinquishing the need to be right, you open the door to a higher state of being. Real truths are important, but they are not carried by forceful, angry, fierce debating, or by clinging to our positions as if letting them go would endanger our lives. No, these truths have enough power in them to carry them without us forcing them on others or even defending them. They only need our firm, humble witnessing and our trust that we ultimately don't need to try and control everything, since we live in a fundamentally good universe. You've now reached the end of the video. Remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for your time.